really matter. That is, we're above the jamming transition. That is, we have to be above it.
It don't matter because you already told us the shear modulus.
The shear modulus, but what I care about there is the shear modulus divided by, I'm looking the relative average to the bulk modulus and to the shear modulus. So I've divided this so that this all would sit on top of each other. Otherwise, you're right, this thing would just shift down. But so the theoretical line is understood afterwards. We got the data first, and we understood the data, and we got better and better data, and so that's what we got. And then we said, where does this come from? And this was an understanding that was provided by postdoc Daniel Hexner. So he was able to analyze this and see why this should be the case. So I get to do that because I'm on a computer and I get to go in and snip that bond. So this is from a computer point of view. It's a very good question because that's what the second or the third half of this talk is going to be about. How could I do this and make it work, right? I mean, and so if you hold on to that question, I hope I'll try to give you some flavor of why we can do this. Okay, so this is what I call this new principle of disordered matter, this independence of bond level response. So the contribution of any bond to one modulus is uncorrelated to its contribution to another, and so that's this surprising thing that a bond. No one bond is more important than another. In general, it will just play different roles depending on what perturbation I'm putting on the outside, what kind of compression or shear I'm putting on. And the other part is what I showed you at the beginning, is that these distributions are very broad and universal. And so this is, and if you notice there was a star on that, there was some thing I just swept under the rug, but basically they're universal. Okay. So this is a new principle for disordered matter, and this is, one of the things that comes out of trying to study what is the physics of disorder as distinct from what you would have gotten for an ordered system. So they're really very, very different. This is not the same. So so it doesn't matter very much for what I'm talking about now. We haven't studied it over enormous ranges of particle size, but certainly in a two-dimensional system, I don't want to have all the particles be the same size because then they tend to crystallize, and so I don't want to do that. So I'm always dealing with bidispersed or polydispersed things in 2 dimensions. In 3 dimensions, that's much less onerous, and so I could get by with monodispersed or a polydispersed system. I'm not letting some particles go to 0, but plus or minus 30%. We've done that, and it doesn't matter. The principle I'm talking about tonight doesn't matter. Good question. Let's see. Okay, so let's. Okay, so now I want to talk about this idea of malleability of disorder, and so what are the new design rules that you can use? And so this is exactly where I want to go with doing just what you're telling me. Okay, so remember this diagram I had at the beginning. So this is the bulk modulus and the shear modulus, and the bulk modulus measures the compression. Material that behave like this, and this is what's called the negative Poisson ratio material. And so this is looking at the compression or the change in these 2 directions when I pull it in or compress it along this one axis. Okay, and so that's what the Poisson ratio measures. And so what I want to now just point out is that this ratio that I've been telling you about, the bulk modulus and the shear modulus, if I take the ratio of G over B, that is the same information as what you get in Poisson's ratio. That is, it's just ordinary elasticity theory tells me that the Poisson's ratio, that's how much it compresses along the side axis when I pull on in the longitudinal direction, versus G over B is a monotonic function. One is a monotonic function of the other. If G is much, much smaller than B, then you have a normal material. That's what we're all used to. If G is much, much bigger than B, then you get this negative Poisson's ratio material, and this is weird. So does anyone know what's the common thing that you actually have that has a Poisson ratio near 0? Cork. Your wine bottles are made, stuffed with cork, and it's good that they found a material to do that with, because if you had an ordinary material and I tried to force this material into the wine bottle, it would just explode the wine bottle, right? And so cork is very nice because you can push it in or pull it out without this thing breaking or flying out of the material. And so, we don't have very many negative Poisson ratio materials, and you can just begin to think that there are so many different things. It would be great if we had them, and you could begin to use this as a new kind of building block for matter. So what does this have to do with what I was telling you about? And so this is your question that you just asked a minute ago. So now that I know that I care about this ratio of G over B, and I can manipulate G and B independently of one another, then I can start doing the following. So if I start at some number of bonds that are large over where this thing is over-constrained system, so it's a highly jammed system, I can choose, since I know everything from the computer, I can choose which bond has the largest change in delta B. If I pull that out, B gets dropped as much as possible. G only gets dropped by its average amount, and so G over B should go up. And so that was one bond. So I do it again and again and again. So this is your question, doing over and over again. Where do I end up? And note that this is, again, a log scale. And by doing this a whole bunch of times, we can get something 10 to the 12 times larger ratio of G over B than what we started with. Okay, so that was by going into the computer, knowing what we wanted to do, and choosing the right bond to pull out, and we're able to then manipulate it. And I can get as auxetic a material as I want. I mean, this is, G over B goes to infinity means it's essentially -1 for the Poisson ratio. It's this thing. But I could have done any of the other algorithms as well. That is, I could have pruned the bonds with the minimum delta B, and I would have gotten this green line, because now the minimum delta B doesn't change B at all, but it drops G by the most it can, and so it's going to get smaller, and I can do the same things by triggering on the value of G that it has. So I can get anything I want from 10 to the -8 to 10 to the 12. I mean, so this is, many orders of magnitude that we're able to do just by plucking out a few of the bonds in any material that I have. Okay, and so this is what I would say a greedy computer algorithm. Each time I went in and I chose, okay, which bond is going to be the most bang for the buck? That is, I pull this bond out and I pull out the one with the largest delta B, and then I keep doing that, and I just flow along this curve. And they're basically power law curves that I can go as high as I want. Okay, and so that was a greedy algorithm that we got from the computer. It didn't think ahead. It didn't have to do any computation of any great merit. All it did was find, okay, which local move could I do which is the best? And that's all it did. And we were able to get this vast array of the things that we could do. So that is what we would get for this bulk property. And that's neat because, I've already shown now that we can make these materials that are weird materials, things you wouldn't normally get. But we want to know, could you do something else? And so this is an idea that we get from the protein literature. And so in proteins, there's this thing that they call allostery, which I didn't know what it meant until we ran into it. And what allostery is that if you have a protein of some large molecule, and I do something here, at a far distant point, the protein now behaves differently than it did before. That is, it could open up a bit, so it now can bind something that was there, or it could close it up so it couldn't bind anymore. And so that is, I do a local thing at one point, and far away, there's an action. And this is important for biological activity in proteins. And so we were wondering, well, is this something that we could design into a network as well? Or is this something really special about the protein molecules, or is this something more generic? And so this is work that several groups in our collaboration were working on. So our group, and also Carolina, who's here, and Mathieu, were working on the same types of things. And the idea is that we take a random network that we just take any one that we pull out of the computer, and I come up and ask you, please, to choose some point on this that you want to be the source. And so you just come in and you just do, okay, this point is the source. I mean, I can't do this now because I'm talking, but but we could have done this before, and you have complete choice to where the source should be. Then I call you back and say, okay, I want you also to choose a target, and so you choose that point up there as a target. It's far away. And then I ask the following question is, well, okay, you get this one last choice is, if I pull on the source, do I want the target to come apart, or do I want to go together? So I'm giving you complete choice as to what you want this thing to have, whatever you want it to do. And so it chooses this. And so what I want to show you is that we can do this, and so this is now something that we're able to make in the lab. And so can we? Yeah, here. So this is what's here. So you can see my finger. So you see that's live. Okay, and so it's here's this network, and I asked you to where is the source, and we chose these 2 points to be the source, and then where did you want to be the target? Here and here. Okay, so that was what we tried to do. And then now I want to show you what can be done with this. So this is actually not one network, although I put them on top of each other, just so you can see that, yes, they really, really look almost identical to each other. But there are a few bonds that are different, just about 4 bonds that are different between these 2 networks. And now I pull one apart, and I take this source here, you can see it, and I pull it apart, and you can see that moves together. And I take this one, and I pull this one apart, and it moves apart. That is, I can design any of this I want. And so here is in your face, obvious that we could have chosen either one, and we can do this with essentially 100% success rate over and over again. We can do it in 3 dimensions as well. So that was 3-dimensional one, and this was the source in white, and this red was the target. And if I squeeze this, you probably can't see in the back, but you can see that we can design this in 3 dimensions as well. So we can not only design it, we can build them. So these are things that are eminently doable in our in the lab. One in the, okay, you ask. So you first.
The question is, how much is it depends on the network topology? Can I do play this on any network, or if I have 2 clusters and there's one guy running?
So those are wonderful questions, and I don't know the answer to the generality of this. This is why I told you specifically that I started with the JAMS network, because
So it sounds like JAM systems generate these type of networks.
That's right. But I don't think it has to be JAMS. I think it's much more general than that. But I'm sure you can find networks that will violate this as well. But certainly all the JAM networks do this. Any things that look like JAM networks seem to be okay, but there are going to be others that are.
Sounds like there's a correlation issue.
And so that would be something that we should look at. So
what is the algorithm, and how does it scale with the number of edges?
So the algorithm is that basically it's a greedy algorithm. We have a cost function that we say how much the if we do this, we want this thing to behave in a certain way. So we make that a cost function, and then we go through and ask which bond got me closest to or lowered the cost by as much as possible. So that's kind of what the algorithm is. It's very similar to what we did with the other one. And what it scales like is not entirely sure, but it looks kind of like it's linear in the dimension of the system. Not so as you go for larger and larger systems, you have to take out a fewer and fewer percentage of bonds.
These are source and target site needs to be always fast.
No, they can be anywhere that is these are in finite size systems. We can do this also with a totally periodically continued systems. I can't make them periodically continued because I don't know how to do that, but on the computer we can.
How many sources and targets can you put in the same network?
So this is a great question, and so we studied one aspect of that. That is, we've studied if we start with one source, how many targets can I control? And you can control a lot. I didn't put in that slide here because that's not this. I'm trying to move on to the next thing. But and so it's a sat-unsat problem in a sense that is you get 100% possibility out to some large n, and then suddenly it drops off where I can't solve it anymore. And so that's what it looks like. And then how many increases with the size of the system. And so but it says that I can solve this in n factorial ways. I mean, there's lots and lots depending on how many other sources I want to have. Someone is.
But I'm trying to imagine what a material would look like which says G over B very high, and if there is like a naturally occurring material like that.
No, naturally occurring materials, if they did have that, they'd be negative Poisson ratio. And I already told you those are weird. So this means that I have to, these things that I'm making are not naturally occurring, but I've made them to be that way. And yes, they will have a large, I mean, it's 1-to-1 correspondence. If I have a large negative Poisson ratio, it means G is much bigger than D. Okay. So, look, I mean, there's all sorts of wonderful questions about this. I'm not going to, I guess I don't want to go off into that pathway right now, but yes, there is, one class of work that Andrea Liu's group is doing now is trying to understand, well, what is the nature of the topology of looking at, is there a crease, is there a fold, is there a break between these things? But what I would also say is that it's not going to be only one kind. You have a very broad distribution of what can happen, because as I showed you, I can do this in many different ways, right? And so I can find ones that are very much like a one path, others which are much more distributed. Okay, so now I just want to say, whoops, I went back to this. So, to go aside. I just showed you. Okay, so now the directed. So this is the last half of the talk. Okay, and so this is this idea of directed aging. And so I want to say a word or two about aging. And so typically, aging is considered to be a nuisance, right? And it makes it's merely detrimental to anything that we want. But and as an example of that, I don't know how many of you, when you were in high school or grade school, you had your ruler, and you were measuring something at school, and you got one result, and then when you went home, you remeasured it, and you seemed to get a different answer. And then why was that? And well, the reason for that is, well, you use different rulers. And so I don't know whether you can see this, as one of these rulers has been, this one has been aged, and the other one not. And they're different length. Right? One has shrunk over time with respect to the other. And so that's why when you went home and you used the old ruler that you had bought long ago, you were getting slightly different answers. So this is an example of aging being detrimental and a pain, right? And, I think that they have improved the plastics since I was a kid. And so this is, I have to admit, this is age. This is completely aged, but I aged it, accelerated the aging. I used heat to accelerate the aging. So that's, but this is the effect that you saw back in high school, at least my age. Well, this was not microwave. Microwave wouldn't have done much to plastic, but the boiling water would do. Okay, so that's an idea of what aging is and what you're familiar with. So, okay, can we go to the stability? And so consider an enormous pile of something. So sand, salt, gravel, something very, very large and made of grains. And I'm going to look deep inside this pile, and in this region, the material is under incredible stresses from all the weight on top of it. And so the pressure is enormous. So now I want to look, well, what would that mean? So if I look at one point on the pile, I see a place where two of these grains are really pushing up onto each other with a great deal of force. Another place, just a little, or another direction, they're hardly touching at all. Slightly, but not much. And then you ask, okay, so what's going to happen that these, over time, these two kinds of contacts will behave differently from one another? Because one is under pressure and one is not. And so if you think about the ones that are under great stress are going to deform slowly under time, that is, they'll deform plastically because they're feeling this pressure, and those under no stress basically remain unaffected over time, then you see that there's preferential relaxation of the bonds that are under stress. Those that are under stress are going to plastically deform. Those that are not under stress are going to remain basically unaffected. So over time, this is just similar to what I've been describing about the pruning algorithm. I preferentially pruned those bonds which would feel the most pressure on them. Right? And here, I'm saying, oh, but nature is doing that for me. And so the system is going to evolve depending on the stresses to which it was exposed. And now I want to ask, does such a system naturally become auxetic, does it naturally have a negative Poisson ratio? And so to consider this, I just want to look to start off with at the evolution of such a system, so of a network. And so the energy of that network that I wrote down for you at the beginning is just the sum of the springs being stretched on each bond. And so that's the total energy, is 1/2 k delta x squared for each bond, sum overall. That's the total energy. And then you can ask, well, what does plastic deformation do? Well, it slowly could change the spring constant of where these particles are pushing up against each other. Or it could slowly change the length of the spring if the material flows out of that region and they could get a little bit closer together. So there are various possibilities for what the system, how it could respond. But the point is that it will respond. it will respond in a way that remembers what its training was, how it was aged. And I didn't need any computer to optimize the response, and I don't need the tiny finger. Someone here asked, how could I do this in a real system? Because the real system, how could I look down so carefully and pull out one bond at a time at a microscopic scale? So here, I'm not having to do that. I'm trying to let nature do that evolution for me. And so here is a simulation of looking at one of those networks that we treated in this way. We compress it, and we let this thing age. And you see that over time, this thing starts with a nice positive Poisson ratio and drops to significantly negative values. And so this thing has become really auxetic by the end of this aging process. Okay, so this is one example. Another thing you could have asked is, well, could I have taught this thing to be allosteric as well? That is, the one having to do with the local bond changing at one point versus another. And that's what we're showing here. So we start with this network, and this answers the question about whether it had to be at the external edge or it could be inside. So here was the source, this green one. This was the target. And so what Daniel did here was he just did this an oscillating shear to this thing. And this is what the response is. And so the green is the source. And so it's just constantly being the same amount each time, back and forth, over and over again. So there's 25 cycles. And the red is what this target is responding. And you see that at the beginning it doesn't respond at all, but after a while the response picks up, and towards the end it's already over 80% of what the source is doing. So it's able to even do the allosteric behavior, not just the Poisson ratio.
Whether it comes back in phase or on phase?
Well, that's you're tuning that in by you're playing with both of these bonds at the same time. So if you wanted the other, you would do them out of phase with each other. So it's not that randomness isn't there. Okay, so can we do this in the real world? And so this is what we've done. So we can now take materials which I did not accelerate the aging as I did with the rulers, because the rulers I had to buy the right material that they make rulers from. But here we've used a EVA foam to make our systems. We can make all sorts of systems. We can make ones that look like particle packings, and so that's the one on the left. In the middle is the one with the what I've been describing all along, which are ones based on these networks coming from the particle packings. On the right, we have the negative of this. That is, we have holes punched into this sheet. That comes from, so this is a holy sheet in that you put the holes in at random as they would have been from the jam packing, but now they're holes rather than particles. And then what we do is we do the aging. Just as I told you we were thinking about doing the simulations, here we're doing it in real life. So what Nidhi does is she takes this and she sticks that material into a frame that's somewhat smaller, and then just waits. Does nothing more than just wait. So it sits there for a day. And at the end of the day, I mean, so that's why it's important to have chosen the right material, because this is one that you can do in a day. I mean, other materials might take years to get the plastic to flow. This is a nice one that we can do these experiments on and see how it works. And so she sticks them in here for some waiting period, and then she removes this, and now measures the new Poisson ratio for this material. And so this is the results for that. That is, depending on how much the training strain is, that you can either have a small effect, or if you increase the strain, you can certainly train this thing. Now, there's a real system, that the real system has become negative Poisson ratio, and that you can tune this Poisson ratio to be, depending on the strain, you can get it to be negative in all of these. Well, in these two, it goes negative. In this one, it certainly drops, but it doesn't get to the negative regime. So we can do this in the lab as well. Okay, so yes, I mean, I could have done this by then tuning on the shear modules rather than the bulk modules. And so I would, but yes, I mean, I can tune pretty much what I want. Okay, so the last thing, since I have time, I'm just going to very quickly just say that we can do this in other protocols as well. So I've been talking about these networks, but remember this guy. And this guy was able, I did this shearing back and forth. I can do that in a jam system, and so I take this jam system, and so this, starting with what Sri Shastri has shown, is that you start with this jam system, and now you do the same kind of oscillating shear on this thing, and after a while, it then drops into a state where it remembers what that shear stress was, the maximum shear stress to put on this is. And so you can see that how happens in this system. It took only 4 cycles before this thing then found out of all of the possible ground states for the system. I mean, mind you, there are a few thousand particles in the system. The number of ground states is on the order of 10 to the 1,000. And of all those ground states, it finds one that just goes around this path, visiting the same few minimum over and over and over again as I go through the cycle. And so the end point of this is just to say, well, it was very easy in these systems that are based on these jamming configurations on the very rough energy landscape picture to tune in memories of what you started, and you can tune them in different ways, and you can get different behaviors which may be what you want to tune in. And it's now depends on us what you want to tune in, and what our imagination tells us is what we can tune in. The point is, it's exceedingly easy to do this in all of the cases that I've shown you. Both the shearing, which only takes a few oscillations, and these networks which can break apart. The networks will have to take a few bonds out before it reaches its endpoint. And so let me just finish with go back to that quote I had at the beginning, that there's many forms of memory as there are ways of perceiving, and every one of them is worth mining for inspiration. And so I think, I've only shown you a couple of memories here.